All right, so this is what we're going to be rigging for this class. So we'll have two rigging assignments. One of them is going to be a hard rigging thing, so something mechanical. If you're doing an automotive animation, typically you want to have the pieces rigged a certain way, very mechanical, very hard surface-y type stuff, okay? So this will be a hard surface type item that we will do. We will also have a soft one, and if I find my character here, and then I'm still working on him. We still have time. I lied, that's not the folder. Recent projects, organic, there we go. Where did he go? He should have been right there. Organic rig, there it is. Where is it, at the bottom? Oh, on the left? Oh, they did that again. Let me make sure I grab the right one. Yeah, there's something wrong with my configuration sometimes where it does that. 824, that's the one. All right. And then here will be our organic one. Okay, and then with this one, obviously we're dealing with other stuff. The mechanical one, we have a lot of pieces that go into it. So for even just the arm area, you have all these different pieces that go into making the arm what it is. We also have a hydraulic that connects things. We have a lot of joints in there to move things around. Here, we have one big shape. And so if you had a character, typically that's how the character is going to be animated, is you have one shape that's the character. Like the hand is all one piece for each hand, arm, leg, everything is just all one piece. If this was a mechanical hand, I would have actual like joints or hinges at each one of my knuckles, and that's what would cause them to move, okay? So here we will have this guy who will then be rigged differently. So we're going to start off with the mechanical one first. Mechanical. Now this isn't available yet. I just want to do another check before I pass this out. Usually I forget one thing or two things, and then you have to fix it. So I just want to make sure before I give this out that I've corrected all the stuff that I need to correct. Just so you understand the process of modeling something that's going to be animated, whether it's hard or soft, typically I'll go through and I will add some animation controls as I'm going and testing things out. That way I can get an understanding of how far my limits are, whether I need to modify things like the organic one. I animated, or I built him, and then I opened his mouth, and it wasn't deep enough, so I had to unanimate him, make his mouth deeper so that it looked more like he had actual like inner pieces. Same thing with this. I had to test out some of the pieces on here, make sure they worked, tweak some things, and then everything would be happy, okay? So the idea with rigging, if you think back to when we did the original stick animation, the first thing we did was we went through and we created a connection between all these curves and the pieces of geometry so that we could easily move them. That's the whole concept with this. Just like the Andy rig or the Ray or whichever one you picked, it would be very difficult to animate those things without having all of those other controls on top of it. So on him, let's make a list real quick of things that we would need to animate or to rig. So we will split screen this and that. I just want this, so hide the outliner. There we go. And you don't need to be as big. You can just be smaller. Yeah, smaller. There we go. Okay. So first thing, we'll start up here at the tail area. So the tail has 3 hinges on it. So you see how we can pivot it on this side, pivot it on that side, pivot it on this to give that tail a little bit of movement so that it gives it a little bit more life to the character, feeling something like a crustacean, a crab, something along those lines. We also have this. Now, I've set it up, that is a piece of glass, but think of it like, if you watch movies like WALL-E, really any movie, typically there's these little elements that go on them that help you kind of read what the character is doing. So this could actually be a light on the character. And the brighter the light would get, maybe that is what the character is feeling or how excited the character is. Or maybe it's a different color, and that's controlling what we're seeing as far as emotion-wise from the character. Like WALL-E says very few words. Most of his emotion comes from his movement, from the sounds that he makes, from different ways that his antennas and things fold down. So this item here we could use as a light that would indicate some sort of emotion that the character is feeling. So I'm going to put a possible under here and just say, maybe the light on tail could be something that we could use. Okay. There's also these here, right? So those two could be something that we incorporated as some sort of light. Now there's a possibility of overdoing it. Like I have too many things going on and the viewer doesn't know what to focus on. If I just use this one, that could suffice for the whole thing. Or I could use something like that. So I'm just going to put this as a possible lights on body. I'm not going to do these ones. I'm just showing you that we could do those ones. Okay. There's his shoulder. So this is something we will definitely need to animate. So we have his shoulder. We have his elbow. And then we have the hydraulic on arms. Okay, now he doesn't have any fingers, so if you look at just this, we want to be able to animate this thing, we want to be able to animate this thing, and then we want to be able to animate, obviously, that hinge or that hydraulic going in and out. He also has, again, some kind of spring or light or something. Again, we could use that as a device. If this was a deadly character or something that switches modes, it could be blue when he's in friendly mode and then red when he's in angry mode. Or as he does a strike and he hits the ground, that could like light up if we wanted to, okay? As you go into any kind of rigging process, you have to consider all the different things you may want to do with that character because those might be controls that you would need at some point. This arm's the same way, so I don't need to duplicate that. I just have the same thing there. We do have this vision area, so he is able to, kind of rotate around. Whoops, let's grab the right spot. Rotate this around so he can look. Obviously, these pieces need to come with it, but as I grab them here and do this, they're not doing the right thing, so that's something that has to be adjusted. So eye movement. And then if we go into wireframe and I look inside the eye, there's actually an iris inside here that is used for opening and closing. Again, something that will help dictate to or help read on camera what the creature is feeling. There's no mouth. He doesn't have words. So he needs to communicate some way. Okay, so that's all we need to rig. For any of our assignments we're doing where we're rigging something, we're going to rig it and then we're going to animate it. And that way we show off all the controls of our rig, okay? So base, we would do these. Extra, if you wanted, you could do these kinds of things. Other stuff you might want to do, what about this? Maybe I would want to animate that, moving up and down. That could be something that gives them a little bit of personality. Maybe this one, oops, maybe not, right? Kind of intersects here. The model's really not built for doing that kind of thing. Maybe this could go in or out. Maybe not even that. Yeah, I could kind of go like that, but not really. Maybe these. So I'm going to put on there possible, maybe like side eyelashes. We have the iris. We have that. Okay. There's also some lights that are on him. Those lights could also be animated too. So if we had this light that just kind of followed him around, if it's blue, he's happy. If it's red, he's angry. So, we could add these lights on the character. Okay. So those are all the things that we need to create controls for. Okay. Now, if any one of these is off, even by a little bit, the rig won't work. Just like our stick. If I would have taken that curve and moved it over, and I tried to rotate it, well, it might rotate in a completely different spot that doesn't make any sense to it. So I need to make sure that everything is lined up correctly. I'm going to just make a new scene, and we're going to go over some of the items we'll use to rig our stuff. So I'm not going to actually rig him yet. I'm going to go over the things I will use to rig the character. So we've been in the animation menu for most of the class. Under the rigging menu, this is where we'll find all of those other things, okay? So something like the tail, we have a hinge, A hinged joint is typically something that would rotate left and right, okay? The foundation of all rigging that we do is under this skeleton area, under this create joints, okay? So think of this like if you were to actually look at bones inside of a person, each one of those areas where we move something around is a joint. It allows us to create a connection between different items. So anytime I draw joints, I go into my front view, my right view, my top view, anything but perspective really. I'm going to turn my grid on so I can see it. There it is. And I'm just going to click, okay? Now this is super tiny because I'm super zoomed out. Let me zoom back in. There we go. Okay, so this is a joint, and you think of it just like the joints inside your body. I have a joint right here in my shoulder. It's a shoulder joint, right? If I click again, there's another joint. Now, between my shoulder joint and my elbow joint, what is in between? Bone, right? And that's what they call it. They call it the bone that would go between them. Now, does your bone ever move? Should your bone ever move? Let's put it that way. Right? No, it should not. Right? The joints move. The joints rotate. That adjusts where the bone is, and that's what we do. So at no point am I going to ever try to grab this and do anything with it. That's just a visual representation of where that's coming from and going to. Okay? So let me make a couple more. Okay. Now, as I click on this one, you'll see this one is kind of smaller than that one. Doesn't matter. The visual representation of these doesn't matter at all. The fact that this is smaller than that has no bearing on it. If I look over here, it says 0.585. If I click on this one, it says 0.657. It does not matter. I don't know what this one is, 0.657 also. Okay? If I did this, this is something that we typically will never do. Okay? At no point, if I have my shoulder, I have my elbow, I have my wrist, at no point am I able to grab my elbow and stretch out my elbow and make this longer. Okay? So anytime we do any kind of animation, it's always going to be these rotations. So I'm just going to be grabbing these and rotating those. Now there is one exception, which is the center. So every rig that we do will have a center joint. That joint can move up and down, left and right. So think of our rig that we have here for our character. The feet we're able to grab and move, but we're not actually grabbing the feet. We're grabbing controls that are making it easier to do this stuff, okay? The only one that we're actually grabbing and moving around is the pelvis. So typically on a human, that pelvis circle, that pelvis control is the one that's going to be the center one that we can move around just like we would do this. If this is the, let's go, let me change, I guess I'm not going to change it. I'm just going to click here, and I'll click there, click here, and click there, and click there. Okay. So we're going to pretend that this is the center of the body, this is the collarbone, this is the shoulder, this is the elbow, and that's the wrist. Okay, so that's what we're pretending. So again, at no point would I grab the wrist and just do this to it because that will stretch out the forearm. Typically I want to rotate the hand, rotate the elbow, rotate the shoulder, and rotate the collarbone. But this one, I really don't have a purpose to just grab that and just rotate everything because that wouldn't happen. Maybe if I was doing a cartwheel, I guess. Typically you would just grab this and move it, and then you'd be able to adjust those other points, okay? Now each item, you'll see, came in a different size. Again, that doesn't matter. But I can also take these and rotate these, just like that. And if I switch to my perspective view, now that I'm done drawing them, I could also rotate them in this direction. Now one thing we'll find with joints is that as we've created them, Maya's doing some extra work behind the scenes, making sure that all the joints pivots are lined up. So you'll see that this one, the rotation is facing the direction it's going. This one, it's facing the direction it's going. This one, it's facing the direction it's going. So I have this one angle where I can do this. If I came into this and I started tweaking these things manually and then I grab this, well, I've just lost the ability to rotate it perfectly around that bone, like twisting it. Okay, so if I wanted to do this, you see how the bone doesn't like change height at all. It just stays exactly there and spins around. I can do that. But the second I take this and move it, well, now I don't have that control anymore. None of these will allow me to do exactly that. Okay, so there will be other tools that we'll have to play with as well. I'm just going to grab this real quick. Quick rig. Auto rig. I don't want to choose a mesh, just make it skeleton. I'm going to grab a character real quick so I can do a quick rig. Sure. Get in there. There we go. And skeleton, quick rig, auto rig. Now, on our characters that we downloaded, we didn't see any of the bones, but they were there. So here's a character. These are the bones that are inside it. And you can see how I rotate the shoulder here. I grab the elbow, rotate that. This is the quick rig. It is not perfect. You can see it put the elbow like in the forearm, which is obviously not where it's supposed to be. We have those controls. There's the hand. Okay. Now look at where the direction of these joints are going. If you look at this one right here, right there, you'll see that's a almost perfect circle, and then the arrows for the bones are going outward to the legs and upwards into the spine. That indicates that that's our central joint, okay? Because that's going out and spreading out to all the other areas. All the other joints have something going into it. So like this joint here has a bone going into it, and it has a bone going out of it. This one has a bone going into it and a bone going out of it. This one has a bone going into it and a bone going out of it. Same thing there, same thing there. This is the only one that has no joint facing into it, no bone going into it. That's our central spot. So that's the one that's typically going to be in the middle, that if we click the right controller here, we can move that around. Okay? So creating joints will be something we will be doing quite often because we need these to help control all of the stuff that we're going to be creating. Just so you can see how the joint function works, you simply click and it creates joints. If you want to branch off somewhere, you can just hit the up arrow and go back to where you want to branch off and then start drawing new joints. And then branch up again and then go like that. And then branch up again and then do that. Okay, so think of something like your hand. We have one joint that comes in here in the wrist. Then we have all the joints for the finger, or the thumb, all the joints for the finger, the middle finger, ring finger, and all that. So each one of these has several joints that go into it, but we have one joint it's coming from. If we go down to our foot, we have toes. Typically people don't rig like each individual toe. Usually they rig just like the ball of the toe. We have to know those things as we get into it. Now, joints are just parented pieces. So if I go like this, and then I turn my outliner on, here's joint 1, that's the main one. I open this up, there's joint 2. I open that up, there's joint 3. I open this up, there's joint 4. If I hold down shift and I collapse and then reopen this, you'll see the parenting structure from joint 1 all the way to joint 17. So that's all the joints that are inside there. If I rotate all of these, I'll get this kind of like whipping motion. Ooh, fancy stuff. Because I'm rotating all of these, very similar to what we did on the stick animation. If we don't want a joint to be parented to something or to be connected to something because we accidentally connected it, we can just unparent it, grab the one it's supposed to be connected to, reparent it, and then you'll see how it recreates that connection. Okay, so same thing here. I could unparent this, grab this piece, oops, reparent it there, and now those are reconnected to that spot. Okay. Now that does, like I said, Maya does this thing where it's kind of orienting all of the joints so that they have these nice little rotations. If it screws any of those up, there's actually a orient joint right here that will go through and it'll reorient all the joints for us, okay? So if I were to grab this, click orient, everything gets back to where they should be. Everything is nice and neat now. Now we'll notice too, if I go to my channel box, the joints are going to have some translate. Depending on where we created them, they will have some sort of translates here. They should never have rotates while we're setting up our rigs. You'll see as I created them from scratch, none of those came in with any rotation at all. Even though they are rotated, even though they're at a different angle, they have 0 rotations. If I were to rotate one like this, I have a rotate here, that's going to throw off my rigging, because my rig, I want to start everything from 0. I want to start everything nice and clean. So I can freeze transform it, and then make sure that all my orientations still work. Sometimes you have to reorient after you do that. It looks like everything's good. Okay. Let me draw some more joints. So I'm pretending this is a finger, so this is the base of the finger. This is the first knuckle, second knuckle, and then this is the tip of the finger. Okay. I go to rotate, that's fine. I go to rotate, that's fine. I go to rotate, that's fine. Okay. As I rotate these, you'll see how nicely they kind of like rotate onto themselves like this. Very cool. If I were to draw these again, and this time I'm not going to offset them at all, I'm just going to go straight. Okay. Now, it seemed to work out pretty good that they all went in the same direction. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes you'll draw something perfectly straight, and one joint will rotate this way, one joint will rotate back that way, and the other joint will rotate a different way altogether. So we just have to be aware of that is something that could happen, and we have to fix it. Sometimes it's going to be going up here to orient, and that will fix it. Okay, it still works. Sometimes it's going to be going into component mode, waiting, there we go, turning the points off, turning the question marks on, and then rotating around which direction these things are rotating from. So this is the direction each one of these is rotating. Sometimes you'll come into this and you'll see this. This one's Y is facing up and the Z is off to the side. This one is not like that. This one is the same way as the first one. This is the same way as the first one and the third one. So then I would have to come into this and re-rotate that. So you can see what this is going to do and why we wouldn't want this. As I go to rotate this now, you'll see that I get this kind of bending happening, which is not what we want. It should reset that back to where it was. Let me re-grab this again. It should rotate just like this, just like our stick rotated before. Okay, so stuff that we have to worry about is that. Now this is just creating joints. Create joints. Okay. Now, to control the joints, obviously we have exactly what I was doing before. When we did the walk cycle and we grabbed the arms and we just rotated it, do you remember what that was called? What kind of kinematics? FK, forward kinematics. We're starting at the top and moving our way forward down the line. Okay? This is forward kinematics, just grabbing stuff and rotating it. Some things, it works fine. We can definitely do forward kinematics on it. If I'm rotating the head, that's one item, I can just rotate the head and it works out fine. Some things like an arm, I want to have the other one, which is an IK inverse kinematics. So if I go into this IK, I marquee this top joint here, marquee the wrist. Now I have this connection between these two where if I move this around, now I'm able to control those joints. Let me change my background color so it's easier to see and hide the grid. There we go. Now we can move all the joints around just like this. Okay, so we need joints to create the IK. You can't create an IK without those. Something that we will constantly be looking at is this. We always want to be able to reset our stuff back to 0. Okay, so my IK comes in just like the joints did with some values here. If I just reset these to 0, it's going to jump itself back to the origin, which then gives my joints rotations, which I don't want. And now it's not actually reset. So we'll go over different ways that we can lock this in. So we're never actually moving this IK, we're moving a controller that controls the IK, so we can always have this spot to be able to reset our stuff back to 0. Just like your rigs were, if you screwed up, you can reset to 0 and his arm would jump back to here or whatever. Okay, so we'll use that a lot. Another tool that we'll use, it's pretty much all from here. We'll use create joint, we'll use mirror joints, we'll use orient. These other ones I typically don't need to use. And then we'll use the IK handle. Some of these we will not get into. IK spline is very cool. If I was animating a snake, I would use IK spline. I can actually create a bunch of joints, put a curve inside there, and then connect the joints to the snake and use the curve to animate the snake moving around. I'll show it real quick, but we're not going to use it for any of our assignments. And the only reason I'm showing it because it is super cool, and we used to do an assignment with this, but subdivision height, there we go, okay. So I'm going to go into my skeleton, go to create joints, make sure my grid is on. Now for our joints to work, we need to have enough divisions for them to actually do something. So in here I have a bunch of joints, but I also have on my surface a bunch of divisions. If I had one division here, one division there, the joints wouldn't do anything. So I'm going to go into this and grab this, and I'm going to connect these two things. This is called binding. When we get to the soft organic one, we will bind. So I'm not going to go over that yet. Then I'm going to do the IK spline. Root on curve, auto parent, auto create. That's fine. So I will click that, click this. Cool. And now in my outliner, I actually have a curve. And if I go to the vertices for the curve, let me hide my joints real quick because they're getting in the way. There we go. And I move them. You can see how I can control those curves, that many divisions, with just these few points. Okay. And if I was to animate, like I said, like we used to do a snake, that item will actually animate along that path. So think of trying to do that any other way, it would be very difficult to do just by grabbing this and moving it along there. It's pretty sweet. Okay, so that's the skeleton area. We only use, like I said, a few things in there. Skinning is for when we do organic stuff. So when we get into the creature guy, we'll use these ones. And again, we'll only use a handful of things from here. Deform we've talked about before. We'll touch on a couple of these things inside there. Constrain we do need to work on. We do need to look at because we will definitely be playing with these. Oops. So here, cone, there we go. I'm just going to create a couple things here just so I can demonstrate what each one of these things is going to do. There we go. Okay. So we've shown this before when we were talking about the Andy picking something up. We use the parent constraint. That's how that whole setup works, is that we're constraining items together. So if I click on this, I shift click that, and I go to constrain. I'm going to skip that one for now. And I go to point, make sure it's reset, and hit add. You'll see I did it in the wrong order. Try this one, that one. There we go. You'll see that this cone is attached to that item. Now, I can pull it away temporarily. The second I grab this and move it, it'll jump back. Okay? So the position of this is locked to this item. If I go to rotate, the rotation does nothing because it's only the translate. If I come over here, you'll see there's a point constraint. I can delete that. Move that away. Move this. No connection. Okay. Let's do this again. So let's go to constrain. I'm going to skip parent and point. I'm going to go to orient. Now the position doesn't do anything, but rotation is now linked together. Okay. We used parent constraint. I believe we used parent constraint or orient constraint when we did our stick rig. So you'll see these things used quite a bit. Okay, nothing there. All right, so I'll delete that. Now, when we go to parent constraint, this is actually both of those items together. It's the translate and it's the rotate put together. There is a button in all of these that says maintain offset. So the distance between these two right now, that's the offset. If this one is already rotated some, if this is not on, it will jump. Sorry, if this is not on, it will jump to the same rotation, jump to the same translate. If this is on, it'll stay exactly there and just maintain the offset that it currently has. Now you'll see that this is also moving, kind of weird with it, but it is moving the way that you would think it would if we just parented it. Okay, so again, something we might use is that parenting constraint. There's also one for scale. Pull vector we'll use eventually, we'll get to that. And then there's these other ones. We're not going to get totally into them, but I will show point on poly because I think that's kind of a cool one. If I have this point right here, and I had this, oops, let me turn my symmetry off. This point right there, there we go. And I had this item, I can do constrain point on poly, and it'll actually constrain this item to this polygon, so that as it moves, it's like stuck to it. So if you think of a character and they might have, let's say, cufflinks, or a button, or pencils, or whatever, you can constrain those items to be stuck to that character. When we do our creature, he's going to be squishing and squashing and stretching and whatever. We couldn't just parent something to it because as I move this, sure, it's moving. But as I squish this, you can see how it's adapting to it. Where if this was just like locked onto that surface or parented to the surface, any of these scales that I did wouldn't follow it the same way that it's doing here. And the same thing with as I rotate this and do all these, none of those would go with it. So that point on poly is a super awesome one. What was the other one? And aim vector, there we go. Okay, so aim vector is pretty cool. I'm going to click this, click that, go to aim vector, okay. And now what this does is it aims at this thing. So you'll see how the cone is always pointing at it. Typically when you do an eye, so if you were to look at Andy or your rig and you grab that controller that's out in front and you move that around, that's the aim constraint. That's what this is doing. Just aiming those eyes right at it. And if I just shift click this and do an aim constraint, let me go to wireframe unshaded, you'll see now they're both looking at it. Okay, so these are all so far surface things, all things that are right here in this menus that we would use. Those are the easy ones. The other ones that we would get into, let me go to cube, and let me go to locator. And I'll hide my grid. There we go. I'm going to go under modify. I'm going to add an attribute here, right there. And I'm just going to call this cube height. Okay. So whenever I create an attribute, it actually puts it over there. So all those things you saw on your rig where it said left foot, right foot, toes, fingers, whatever items, all of those are created using add attribute. Right there. So there's add, delete, edit. Right now it doesn't do anything. Okay, we've just given it a name. We could call it gobbledygook and it would still do the same exact thing. I want to link these two things together. This is where the more complicated parts of rigging come in, usually where people get more confused. One of the areas, and we'll see how this goes, I typically don't use a node editor inside of Maya because I do it other ways. But we'll try to use a node editor and we'll just see if I epically fail or not at this. So I'm just going to drag these items into the node editor. So here's my locator shape, here's my locator, here's my p-cube shape, here's my p-cube. So inside here I want to connect item A to item B. Every item we have inside Maya has a locator shape, or a shape node. So the cube has a shape, the locator has a shape, and then it has the regular transform node, which is what that is. Okay, so if I open this up, somewhere inside here, I don't see anything there. Let me open this one up. Bounding center, inverse, I don't see anything there either. Oh, there it is, cube height right there. I missed it. I didn't go down far enough. So under the locator, you'll see there's one that says cube height, and there's a dot here, and there's a dot there. So this will allow me to connect stuff to the cube height, or take the cube height number and connect it to other stuff. So if I open up this one, I go to scale, I can drag this cube height into my Y, and now it's connected. So now if I scoot that off, grab this, go to cube height, and drag it, you'll see that I've connected the cube height to that number. So far, I have not failed at using the node editor. Now what's neat about this is that I can connect this to the X, I can connect it to the Z, and I can connect it to the Y. So very quickly, I can do all three of those, and that way as I change this one number, it's going to change all of those numbers at the same time.
This is like the fingers?
Correct. Well, part of it is like the fingers, depending on how it's set up. So on some of them, like Andy, he has circles up for each finger, right? So those could be parented, they could be orient constrained, they could be parent constrained, they could be this, they could be 10 other things, okay? As a rigger, we need to be able to go through and see all these different tools, and based on the situation, based on the rest of the rig, make decisions about which ones we're going to use, right? It's kind of like, did you build that house using this kind of hammer or this kind of hammer or that kind of hammer? They're all the same thing, it's just a matter of which one you prefer for your stuff, okay? So they didn't use this one for Andy because Andy did not come out when they had this tool. This is a newer tool. Andy's 12 years old, even though he doesn't look like it. Oops, I want to keep that there. He was using other stuff, but that was what it was. Now inside here, if I can find the menu button, it's right there. There's a create. Now, if you've looked at the Hypershade, you may have seen this kind of thing before. Inside here, we can create new nodes like a multiply. So I'm going to add this multiply. And I can connect different things to these different numbers. So if I were to take this cube height, drag it into, let's say, the Y here, and then take the output Y, drag this to Y, now what I can do is change what that number means to it. So as I go here, right now it's making it equal. It's the same number for X, Y, and Z. If I open up that multiplier, I change what this Y is being multiplied by. If I just changed it to 10, we'll see that it does absolutely nothing. Why aren't you doing anything? That's why. Oh, I didn't connect it to the right one. That's why. Burp, burp. There we go. So let's connect this output Y into that. There we go. So now the Y value is always going to be that much bigger than it, okay? Now this does take a bit of thought about how you're connecting things inside there, okay? So think of it like this. If I took this first finger and I rotated it down, I want the rest of the fingers to be automatic, let's say. So this one, when I rotate it 90 degrees, I want this next one to go 45, and I want the next one to go 22 and a half. So basically I'm dividing each one of these by 2. So I would have to know that, and then I could put that into the computer to do something like this, okay? So this is more of a conceptual way to think. You kind of have to have a little bit of programming-esque logic. Where something like this is really handy, think of a car. As a car moves forward, there's no guessing as to how far the tires are going to rotate. It's exact. So the radius of the tires will dictate how far the wheel is going to spin for each time. So if a tire is, let's say, 100 meters, it's not 100 meters in diameter, 100 meters in diameter or 100 meters circumference, the car is going to travel, let's say, 100 meters before it hits all of those points, okay? So we would have to punch that into here so that as we animate our car moving, the tire spinning is automatically happening, okay? So this is an option. Most people don't go with that. Typically, I don't go with that unless it's a 1-for-1 or an easy thing like it's always going to be half this height or something. I like to show it because some people do enjoy. Some people do like to work that way. So that was the node editor. You can also do that in the Hypershade. You don't need to, but you could. The other way we can do this, and this is one of my preferred ways, is expressions. Again, this is something that does confuse people, but this is really a really fast way to do it once you understand this. If you've had After Effects, a lot of these expressions that you would have in After Effects will carry over into this. Not the same syntax, but definitely the same concepts would, okay? So in here, there is a name of this item. I'm just going to copy this and paste it and then control drag this up so we can see it. Everything we use an expression for, the name has to be typed exactly as Maya has it written. So this is p-cube1. That's the name of my item. Way up here, p-cube1. The C is capitalized, everything else is lowercase. This says .scale x. Notice that this says scale x, capital scale, capital X. There's a space here. These are called nice names. Maya gives nice names to all of the stuff so that it's easier for you to read. If I go to my channels and I go to, if I go to edit, channel names, and I go to long, this is where it'll say the name as it's written here, okay? This is what has to be typed in order for the expression to work. Lowercase scale, capital X. If I go to channel names and I go to short, this is just SX, SY, and SZ. That also works. We could type those in as well. As you work on these things, it does help to kind of understand what those are. Most of them are going to be lowercase, whatever the first word is, and then uppercase, whatever the item is. So rotate X, scale X, whatever it is. Okay, so I'm going to make the scale X of this equal to locator1 dot cube height. I think that's what I called it, and I did. Success. Okay, so my locator1, which is here, that's the name of the item. I put a period, whoops, and then I put the name of the attribute, which is cube height, and the way I typed it originally was lowercase cube, capital H. I'm in the habit of always doing that. That's called camel casing. If you look at any programming, typically people use that across the board for how they name things inside their programs. So if you get used to that, it just makes it easier because that's pretty much syntax for programming. And then we end each line with a semicolon and hit edit. Okay. So now if I go to my locator, which is right here, I go to my cube height and I click and drag, you'll see that it adjusts just that scale X. Now this is why I like that better than the other one. It disappeared. I'm going to bring it back by going to expression name, clicky. All I have to do is just copy this and then paste it and then just change stuff here. Y, Z. So now I go to this, I go to cube height, it controls all of them. If I want to multiply one of these, I just put it here, times 9, divided by 2. For whatever reason, plus 4. So now I come, whoa, that's huge. Now I come into here, I go to my cube height, and now I'm controlling all of these things at once. I could even make them relate to each other. So I can say the scale of X is equal to this, but then the scale of Y, I'm going to put that one, equal to the scale of X divided by 2. And then I'll put the scale Z cube 1 dot scale Z, oops, Y times 5. So now as I grab this, I go to cube height and I click and drag. I'm controlling all three of those at the same time, giving them each different values, okay? Now again, this is not very straightforward. Something like the hand controls, it'd be very difficult to write an expression to control each one. Definitely possible, but you typically wouldn't do it through this. Now, I can also do things like this, which is kind of neat. So right now we've just created this connection. I move this, it updates that. But let's say I did this. So 1 semicolon. There There we go. So I'm going to hit play. And then now what we have is we have this animation happening on here. That's happening way too slow though, so let's take that up and multiply this, and then we'll multiply this one even bigger. There we go. So it should happen 20 times faster and go 50 times bigger. It's like the bass kicking. Let's go to 2. Notice how I hit edit after each one of these. There we go. Okay, so you'll see a lot of expressions doing this too, where we're generating these random numbers or generating these kinds of patterns on top of our stuff. Now let's say that I had a sphere. There it is. And I'm going to go in here, and this is P sphere 1. Translate x is equal to sine of time times 100. Okay, so this is the x direction. So I'm going to hit play, and we'll see that. Now again, that's going too slow, so I'm going to speed it up by multiplying the time times 10. And that will make it go faster. Oops, this is too small now. There we go. So that's pretty good. All right, so I'm going to actually do 5, I think would be good there. Okay, so now I'm going to go in here and do P sphere 1 dot translate y. Oops, is equal to the cosine of time times 5 times 100. What do you think is going to happen for the math majors in the class? Right, I didn't think so. It'll move. Now, this is not something that I instinctively knew how to do. This is something that over the years of screwing around with this thing, I stumbled upon using sine for one, using cosine for the other, and we get this. Let me make it smaller so it's a little bit more obvious. There we go. It's a perfect circle. So it'll actually move in a perfect circle. Now that seems kind of silly, but it's definitely awesome. If you think of something like if I had an emitter and I wanted this emitter to just constantly be spinning around, I don't have to set keyframes for it. I can just do that and it'll constantly spin around forever, okay? We're rigging a character, we're rigging hard objects. These tools apply to everything. If I want this to go faster, I just type in different numbers there. There we go. If I want this to gradually get taller, whoops. Oops, TZ equals time times 10. All right, that's going way too slow. It's times 100. There we go. There we go. So gradually it's spinning, and it's actually like corkscrewing that way. It's a weird word. I shouldn't have said it like that.
It's not squashing and stretching.
It is not squashing and stretching. I didn't put that in there. Okay. So now let's get something that's a little bit more exact. So expressions, again, those are 100% exact, but they're very difficult to control when you have intricate movements, right? So something like our hand closing, each one of these knuckles have a very specific angle that they're hitting to get into this spot. So we need to create something that has a bit more control for those kinds of things. So I'm just going to create, what am I going to create? Cylinder, cube, doesn't matter. There we go. So we'll pretend that this is a finger. Yep, that's good there. Plenty of divisions, and I'll even round it off. So you guys paid the extra money for that. Smooth. Perfect. Cool. All right, so I'm going to throw some joints into this, not from that direction, but from this one. Create joints. There, and oops. This is not the correct kind of finger. If I only had that many joints, I need to have the proper amount of joints. There we go. Good. Okay. Some stuff to keep in mind. Your finger doesn't bend from the middle. It bends more from the upper middle. So that's where it bends from. So we always want to get those things placed correctly like so. I'm going to make these joints bigger. So display, animation, joint size. 25, probably good. There we go. So I'm just going to connect these two things, bind skin. Right? So now when I grab this and rotate, there we go. Okay. Now this is definitely not proportionate. The tip of the finger is way longer than even the base of the finger, but that doesn't matter for us. You guys will forgive me for that. I guess black was the easiest way to see that. All right, so I'm going to create a locator. Typically you'll use locators or you'll use curves, and those two things are what you're going to create all your controls on. Curves are easy to grab and see and move around. Same thing with locators. They also don't render. You can use geometry and we have to do some extra settings, but those two things are right out of the box ready to go. So I'm going to create, modify, add attribute, and I'm just going to call this finger curl. Notice the camel casing. Some extra items in here I didn't discuss last time. The kind of item that we're going to be creating is defined here. So these numbers are all what are called float. They can be negative, they can be positive, they can be any number from like 75 trillion to negative 25 trillion or something. Vector is a 3-digit number. So something like color, red, green, blue, that's a 3-digit number. That's what this would be. An integer is a whole number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A Boolean is a yes or no. So if you look at visibility, this is on or off. There's no other options. And then string and enum are more for words. So enum is actually a list of items. On Andy, she had boy, girl, skeleton shirt, whatever. Those were all enums that you can choose from a list of which one you want to pick. Okay. Most of the time, float is what you're going to go with. You can set a minimum and you can set a maximum. So something like my finger, I can rotate it forward like this. How far can I rotate it backwards? Like that, right? I move my other fingers, but I can rotate that back. So most of your things will have some sort of minimum to it. So typically I go for this range of -10 to +10. If you go any higher or any lower, it's very difficult to control those things because you're working in a very shallow field. Okay, so my minimum is -10, my maximum is +10, and then the defaults are always going to be 0. And then okie doke. So there's finger curl, it doesn't do anything. Now we're going to get to the most mind-blowing control of all, which is set driven. So when I went to the node editor, we loaded something on this side, we loaded something on that side, and we drug our control, okay? So when we get into this, the item on the left was controlling the item on the right, okay? Think of it like a car. The item on the left was the person in the driver's seat. The item on the right were all the passengers screaming as it drove off the cliff, okay? Same thing when we went to the expressions. Oops, click. psphere1.tx equals psphere1.tz. Okay, this item is what's getting controlled, so it's actually the flipped opposite. This is where it's getting the value from. So this is controlling that, okay? So with this, we have the same situation. We have a driver, that's our controller, and then we have a driven, which is a controlled item. So in this case, I have two things. Which one is the controller? Is it going to be the locator, or is it going to be the finger joints? The locator. Thank you. So the locator is the driver, so I'm going to load the driver. So there's all the attributes. Now what am I going to control over here when I curl the finger? Do I want to do just one joint? Like, is that curling the finger? No, all of them, right? All of them except for this guy. Anytime we do joints, we always go out to the extent, so we always have that fingertip one. He doesn't do anything though, he just hangs out. So this, and that. And then that is my driven. So locator 1, finger curl is right there, 3 joints, and then I have to know what I'm going to control. So in this case, I'm going to control the rotate Z because that has a number in it. So rotate Z, finger curl. So what I'm doing now is I'm establishing this connection. I'm saying finger curl is going to control rotate Z of these joints. Now, look at it as a, like verbalize what we're doing. Right now we're saying when finger curl is at 0, that's what I want these to look like. And then I set a key. We get a result down here. When finger curl is at positive 10, I'm going to then set what I want these things to look like. Like that. And then I hit key again. When finger curl is at negative 10, I want this to look like, and I'm going to exaggerate this. Anytime we do rigging, it's always best to exaggerate it slightly because we can always back off. We can never, push it further. And then I'm going to hit key again. Okay? So now we have something that is not a one-to-one relationship or not something that is easily mathematically defined. What we have is something that, in this case, we have created the extents of how far this is going to go. Okay, now this was how they did Andy's hand. Typically when you look at any of those controls that are over here, and you have all these different things moving when you slide that controller, that's what's going to be doing it, is these kinds of set-driven type items. Okay, so now let's look at this. This is our list of things that we're going to be using. When we get to the tail, we'll have those 3 hinges. Most likely those are just going to be rotated by us grabbing them and just manually rotating them. That's all we're going to do with those. The shoulder and the elbow, most likely we can do just like a hand control on that. So just that IK, so we have the shoulder joint, the elbow, and the wrist. Then we can just put an IK there and that will control all that rotation. We still need to have some way to control the elbow and which direction that's pointing at. So we'll have to go over that. The hydraulics on the arm, we're actually going to use a combination of point constraint and orient constraint to control how that hydraulic is moving in and out of the arm. The eye movement will use point constraint, or the aim constraint, and then the iris we will use set driven. That way we can control, I slide it one way, the iris opens, slide it another way, the iris closes. Okay? When we get to the other character, we'll do the same thing. Let's break down what things we need to control, and then we'll get into how we're going to control those things. Okay? There's other stuff too I didn't get into. There is a... Oh, there it is. Connection editor. Right there. This is basically the node editor. I didn't show it because it's a lot easier to do it in the node editor than it is here. We can also do stuff inside of the Hypershade. And before the node editor was around, uh-oh, I broke that. There we go. All right, just pretend that that's in there. There we go. Before the node editor was around, this is where we used to connect all those things inside, but we don't need that anymore because the node editor is actually a lot better than that was. And then we'll also do some other stuff too when we get into some of the other things with our shape editor. There it is. So we'll play with that when we get to our character. Okay. So this part, there's no physical assignment for this, but I do recommend before you get into the actual rig, go through and start playing with creating joints and doing all this. Because when you get into the rig, you don't want to mess up. Because if you get so far and you mess up, the only way to fix it is start back over because you kind of chip committed yourself or screwed yourself from the start. Okay? Any questions on that yet?